Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Meghan Fay Zahniser. I'm the Executive Director of AASHE, and I'm happy to be with you all today. Today's webinar is a recap of, a recap of a discussion series that we led throughout April during this time of crisis and tragedy. Amidst so much change happening on higher education campuses throughout the globe, AASHE, essentially, we were trying to figure out how to best support the community. And one of the things that we do best is convene our community. So we thought, let's lead a discussion series and really hear what's happening for our community, how individuals are handling this crisis, the challenges, both different and similar, that various campuses are facing. So today's webinar is really meant to be a bit of a recap and reflection on what we heard. So a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, everybody's on mute. There is a questions pane available for any questions or comments that you have throughout the discussion today. And the sequence of events, you'll hear a little bit from me. We have some guest speakers today, and hopefully at least 10 minutes at the end of the call for us to address any Q&A that comes up. So again, a reminder to put any questions or comments in the questions pane. And I do want to welcome all of our presenters today. We have Mike Harrington, who's from the New School, Aurora Winslade from Swarthmore College, Stefania Fregosi from Portland Community College, Keenat Howitt from Emory University, and Srinivasan Raghavan, who goes by Raghu, from the University of Missouri. So I'm thrilled to have all of these speakers here with you today to share their experiences around COVID and sustainability, what progress looks like, and really how to continue planning and making progress during this time. But first, a couple of reflections. And for those of you that weren't able to participate in one of the discussion series, this slide here sort of shares a bit of how I framed the discussions. There were 8 discussions throughout the month of April. And the intention, as I mentioned, was really to try and get a sense of how our community was doing, to touch base really personally as well as professionally, to get a sense for the various challenges that folks were facing, and to have an understanding as to, as you can see on the slide, how progress is happening during this time, resources that have been particularly helpful to certain folks, how we're serving our institutions and demonstrating value in this moment, and again, how we can plan and prepare for what comes next. So these are the questions that sort of framed each of the discussion calls, and you can imagine with different participants on every call, each call took on a different tone and perhaps a bit of a different angle. But some of the reflections, I was lucky enough to be the facilitator of each of these discussions. And here are just some thoughts on what I really heard as themes from these various discussions. First of all, and it shouldn't be underestimated, that there is a significant amount of fear. First and foremost, the number of people firsthand that are experiencing the tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that so many campuses right now are not only dealing with trying to support students that can't go home, as well as the staff that are essential, but also really trying to serve their community. We heard from some campuses that are housing first responders and frontline workers, and a lot of fear, not just around health and well-being, but a lot of fear around job loss and loss of funding for sustainability programming, for sustainability research. There's so much uncertainty right now, and several of the discussion calls really highlighted that level of uncertainty and fear around what the future holds. It was really, I appreciated everyone's vulnerability that shared those thoughts and those experiences with us, and I think that's definitely going to be something that we're mindful of as we move forward and try and figure out how to best support the community. Another aspect of what we heard is that a lot of work right now is on pause, that so many folks that had been building up to perhaps sort of a big crescendo of work around Earth Day basically had to either shift everything online or cancel altogether. In addition, a lot of planning has been paused. I did hear about some folks that are trying to still make progress with some perhaps smaller project, updating website content, collecting STARS data, but that some more strategic work is on pause, with understandably so a lot of senior leaders really distracted with some other bigger questions. I also heard a lot about how institutions and various individuals at institutions are pursuing strategies for demonstrating the value of sustainability in higher education. How a lot of staff have pivoted to try and be really supportive of engaging students, faculty, and staff virtually through whether it's graduation ceremonies and support, as well as planning for orientations for both staff and students this summer. Also heard about strategies for integrating sustainability staff into the crisis response efforts on campuses, various committees that have been formed or ongoing, again, to respond to this crisis. Several folks had shared how they are trying to embed their sustainability staff onto those committees, demonstrating not only that sustainability staff are integral to the campus, but also that there's a lot that the sustainability community can really provide during this time. Which again, I think some folks had shared how they're hoping to be sort of a go-to resource for their campus right now during these questions, as well as conversations around how to become more resilient. And I heard a lot about how we can look for opportunities to advocate more so for sustainability in higher education and pursue more funding for sustainability in higher education. Perhaps even funding in general for higher ed amidst all of the stimulus responses. And there's some efforts around partner efforts that we've been supportive of with our higher education community. But I think there's a lot more that we could and should be doing. And I definitely heard that pretty consistently throughout the various discussion calls. So by no means is this a comprehensive review of everything that that came up in the 8 different calls, but there was a number of different individuals that participated. I'm really grateful to them for their sharing. At this point, I'd love to be able to sort of hear a bit more on the reflections from our presenters today. And the way that I've asked each of our presenters to sort of frame their remarks is sort of how they're making the connections on their campus between sustainability and COVID. Any recommendations or an idea that they might pose to the community on how we can expand our impact, and any other ideas for how we, not just as AASHE, but really the community, how do we best support each other right now? So with that, I'd love to switch gears and ask Mike to offer his thoughts.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Megan, and thanks for inviting me to speak on behalf of the New School. Again, my name is Mike Harrington, and I am an assistant director at the Tishman Environment and Design Center at the New School in New York. And the Tishman Center basically acts as the sustainability hub for the university. I know many different universities do their sustainability in a lot of different ways. Ours is that we have a facilities group that handles the physical things, and then we handle everything else. And we also sort of translate what the more technical things that facilities talks about to the broader population within the university. So that's just what I do and who I am. So to get into some of the things that we talked about, we at the New School in general, we have a focus on social justice, and at the Tishman Center in particular, all of our work is done in accordance with environmental justice principles and climate justice principles. So we do not separate justice from sustainability. And a lot of these impacts that we're seeing through this time with the pandemic are impacts that we would see in other climate related issues, such as lack of air quality in certain areas. So you'll see, especially in New York, you'll see places like the Bronx in northern Manhattan where children are 15 times more likely to have respiratory issues that require them to be hospitalized than people that live in lower Manhattan. And that's because the air quality there is lower. The housing stock is not of good quality. And this has a direct tie to the pandemic as well. It's constantly shifting, but it does seem to have some sort of respiratory effects. So if you are already at risk for respiratory issues, and then there's a pandemic that affects, or a disease that affects your ability to breathe, you're going to see a higher, probably likely mortality and morbidity there. So we've seen these connections as soon as it started happening, and we started writing posts about it, uh, and we've organized events around it. Like before, we were planning to do a lot of in-person events for Earth Week, as I'm sure a lot of other universities and institutions were planning on doing, which we had to scrap. And we wanted to focus a lot on what was going on now with the pandemic and making connections between environmental justice issues that are ongoing and will continue to be going on even after we figure out some sort of vaccine or any sort of issue. We're going to continue to see these issues happening. So it's not like we have to address these things separately. We have to look at them holistically and say, okay, why are we seeing such high mortality rates with Black and Latino people in Chicago during COVID? But then you also look at, okay, well, this is where like the trash, this is where the trash goes. This is where factories are. This is where you see a lot of places that are polluting and causing poor air quality that is linked to this. So we have to, for us, it's always been, this is something we've been working on. And even though this is an extraordinary time, this hasn't really changed the focus of our work. And we've just tried internally and externally to focus on conflating those two things together and making sure that we're keeping our eyes on the larger climate justice issue, and that pandemics, and like there may be other pandemics due to environmental degradation. So all these things are sort of tied together. In terms of recommendations, I would say that we had a very successful event where we put together a panel, something like this, and we invited some climate change experts. We invited a public health expert. We also invited student, staff, and faculty that may not necessarily work on climate change or have a deep knowledge of it. But we did want to know how they are doing as members of our community, and we gave them a platform to talk about how they're doing at this time, how they're feeling, what we can do, what they are doing to get through this, and how we can support them in our broader community. And I think that's something that goes into the community support, is that we're looking out for each other, and we're also like helping to spread information about this so that people feel a little bit more comfortable, not comfortable, but they at least know what's going on. And a lot of people afterwards said that was very helpful for them to hear people just talking about what's going on with them, to hear some of the science behind it, and to know that these sorts of things are intertwined and they're not separate issues. And I think that's been very helpful for us.
Mike, thanks so much for those thoughts and really highlighting the intersection of equity, social justice, sustainability, and this pandemic. So really appreciate hearing your thoughts. I'm going to shift over to Aurora. Would love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you, Megan, for inviting us here, and for everyone who's listening in. I want to start with a quote from one of my favorite science fiction authors, Kim Stanley Robinson. He wrote a piece for The New Yorker recently on May 1st called "The Coronavirus is Rewriting Our Imaginations." And he says, "What felt impossible has become thinkable. The spring of 2020 is suggestive of how much and how quickly we can change as a civilization." I deeply, deeply want this to be true. I want this to be true for, I think, probably similar reasons to many of you all on this call, because we believe in science, and we know what the science tells us. The science is telling us that we have a very short window, perhaps the next decade or so, to use the science and use the technology that we have to radically transform society, to minimize harm and to save lives. This is not so different than what the scientists and what the doctors told us in January about this pandemic. They said there's a disease, there's a virus, and if you act now, you can reduce the number of lives that are lost. And if you don't, more people are going to die. And in that window of time that the United States had to act, we failed. And people are dead because of that. People are dying. And as Mike pointed out, disproportionately, Black and brown people are dying. Poor people are dying. People who are not responsible for the problems that we're facing are suffering disproportionately. And this is very similar. We are in a historic moment in time, and it's really difficult for me to grasp this on a day-to-day basis. I can't do it all the time, but we're living in a historic moment. And to the extent that there are historians 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and 500 years from now, they're going to be looking at the choices that we make today and judging us, because this is it. This is where we set the path for the future. And that is what I'm saying to my campus leaders. I'm saying, yes, we're in a crisis. We have to do everything to respond. And I'm doing everything that I can, what little things I can do. I found out about a student from American Samoa who has been unable to go home because the borders are closed. Thankfully, there are no cases of coronavirus in American Samoa. And he hasn't been home since he's a freshman. He hasn't been home since he came to campus in the fall. And I'm really fortunate that I was able to hire him to start working with us sooner on a project that he was going to help us with already, which is exploring Indigenous interconnections between sustainability and Indigenous ways of knowing, and get him started working on that remotely now. There are little things that we can and should be doing, but big picture, it's really important that we don't lose track of these similarities. We have time right now. We have the luxury of time and science and technology that can minimize harm. And what felt impossible has become thinkable. I was very inspired by Ibn Goodstein and the message that he gave in his recent webcast about just how rapidly technology has changed and all the opportunities that gives us. And I'm really asking myself, how can I use the platform that I have within my small position within higher education to give voice to the importance of higher education within civil society, shining the light on policies that intersect the global pandemic and climate change. We have a moment where we are entering a time in which there's going to be a huge infusion of capital necessary to recover from the recession that's coming from this global pandemic. It's already happening, but it's going to keep happening as we look to recover financially. We must have that be clean and green. You know, the Green New Deal was a cool idea before the pandemic. It now absolutely makes even more sense because we need a New Deal, and it absolutely has to be clean, because there's not going to be another chance in which there's a huge infusion of capital. And that infusion of capital needs to be the transition to clean infrastructure that gets us off of fossil fuels. So how do we use our voices within higher education? How do we ensure that our presidents, our boards, our senior staff, our faculty, and our students are aligned and united around that message, and bringing that to our state legislators and our federal legislators? That's a question I'm asking. I also am asking the question of connection, and this is my recommendation to AASHE and to all of us. I've been learning from some amazing faculty at Clark University about a model based in Indigenous practice using council, a circle practice of allowing each person the chance to go around circle, much like you did, Megan, in the sessions that you hosted, allowing each person to speak their truth. At Clark University, they've been using this model, a specific methodology that they call the Council on the Uncertain Human Future. And coincidentally, we tested out this model at Swarthmore, where we had faculty from Clark come and host these council sessions. And I just wanted to show you one slide, if I can. Let's see if I can get one slide up. I'm not sure if I know how to do this.
We are seeing your screen. Oh, it's gone. Oh.
Okay, I'm not competent enough to get my slide up. When we polled participants after this council session, did you feel closer to the Swarthmore community after the council? The response was 100% of participants felt closer to the Swarthmore community. And over 80% of participants left understanding that climate change was going to significantly affect their life. And these kinds of models of people coming together in community, talking with one another and digesting and metabolizing that we are in a historic moment of change, so that we can change the felt sense of where we are and go through the kind of paradigm shift that we have to go to for that radical transformation of society that the scientists and the science tells us we need, and that the technology is there to allow us to create. I think that's the recommendation, and I think that's an opportunity. And I also want to just point out there are lots of small opportunities as well. Just one little thing from our campus. We are taking this moment to put out, we've been slowly getting rid of desk side waste bins. Now we're getting rid of all desk side waste pickup and transitioning to every single staff and faculty member taking their own waste to their sorted at a central waste bin and saying this is a safety issue now, and no one is going to fight back against it. So there are sometimes small little rays of opportunity that we can find. And something I heard in the listening session I was in with you, Megan, was from Canada and from California, where there are multiple crises unfolding, or multiple one right after another. I realized that really is the future for all of us. That's what's coming. And I was inspired by the resilience that I was hearing from some of our colleagues who've been going through it. And I think I can learn from colleagues who've gone through it more. And I look forward to more opportunities to connect across those differences and learn from people who've had more experience with it, because this is new to me, being in the midst of this crisis. And I thank you for this opportunity to hear and to share.
Thanks so much, Aurora, both for sharing some of the approaches that you're taking at Swarthmore, as well as highlighting the historic moment that this represents. So really appreciate your share. Stefania, if you could share your thoughts, that'd be great.
Yeah, hey, can I share my screen for a second there?
You sure can. Daita.
There we go. Hi, everybody. So I'm Stefania. I'm the Sustainability Analyst at Portland Community College. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. Portland Community College, we're the largest higher education institution in the state of Oregon. So I just wanted to put that out for you. We're a non-residential community college, and our students do everything from career and technical education to normally distance learning. Now a lot of them are doing remote learning, and this pandemic certainly has had a really profound impact on our operations, and I just wanted to put that out. There's so much of our education is hands-on, that part of the college just really isn't functioning right now, and we're working really hard to try and figure out how to reopen at least parts of the college, particularly the bits in the medical community, the career and technical bits. There are nursing programs, dental programs, and things where online practice is really important. So, but I just wanted to take it back for a minute and just talk a little bit about like our day-to-day activities and maybe provide like a little bit of an update on the things that I talked about with Megan earlier in April when we were more focused on Earth Day, and then go back out to some of the higher level thoughts that we've had as a result of this pandemic. So this is like a screenshot of our sustainability staff, and this is just kind of like what our day-to-day, I'm sure all of you recognize as in our lives, and what this is like. And you know, as a parent, there's going to be interruptions. There's going to be times where I have to check out because somebody needs me for a minute. And it's frequent. And the longer the pandemic goes on, like the more difficult it is to sort of feel like, gosh, I wonder how much longer like people are going to tolerate this. So I just wanted to remind us of that. And then the second thing I wanted to really address was like what success has looked like on our campuses right now. So I know that for a lot of us, and especially as an analyst, like we spend a lot of time focusing on numbers and like how many people did we get engaged and who did they show up, and right now it is especially important to just celebrate our successes for what they are. And for me right now, a lot of what that looked like during our virtual Earth Week was having posts put up there by our faculty who are volunteering their time, by students who, they may have been paid to do this or not, but they're out there and they're engaging and they're listening. So we did a number of activities, and I'm just really grateful to the sustainability community as a whole for being so like sharing during Earth Week and at other times, and other institutions are continuing to share their online resources with each other, both for kids who are going to school remotely or just in general. And that's been really awesome, and to see that kind of response from our community. So again, some of our students had been working pre-COVID-19 on doing a physical panel, art panel, like highlighting activists of color in the sustainability community. And so I was just like personally blown away that they managed to continue to do this and do this online and in such a beautiful fashion. So I wanted to share that with you. So the other thing that's been going on that I wanted to address is that we've been updating our climate action plan all year, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now that I have that up. But really, it was a hard thing because we had already hired, and we don't really want to talk about this too much, but like we had already set up a contract with our consultants prior to having stay-at-home orders. So the question really becomes like, how do you continue in this process that is supposed to be about engaging people, getting their opinions, asking them questions that may involve a lot of emotional bandwidth that is being taken up, and how can we kind of continue to do this, and should we be continuing to do this? And we've decided that we are continuing to do this, and I think one of those reasons is that the amount of emphasis that we've been working to put on equity and public health and social resilience in this particular climate action plan. So this is the first year that we're including resilience as a piece of our climate action plan. It is the first year where equity is really going to be showcasing itself front and center. And one of the things as a huge community college district that's really important to recognize is how place-based our college really is. We have these 4 campuses, and they're each very different, and they're very different neighborhoods. The people that live there are different. They experience the impacts of climate change differently. Portland knows this and has been really great about doing that planning work, and it's time that we take advantage of all the resources that are in our community and get that out there for folks. So I think I did have one more slide. I'm sorry about that, Daita, which is the last thing. So we, right now we've been in a data period that was pretty easy during the early stages of the pandemic. I think nobody's been sure just how long this was going to go on for. So now we've been trying to figure out how to do the engagement piece. So we are about to issue a survey. 2 of the elements of the survey are really about health, wellness, and justice. So we're asking our students how they experience food security, housing security, should we be focusing on this first of all, but then, what of these things, have you personally experienced? So we know that we've been handing out laptops like at an incredible rate. Despite being a college that normally offers distance education, it's really important to distinguish the difference between distance learning and remote learning. And for all of our professors that aren't normally and part of our distance education program, it's been a real challenge to go out there and suddenly switch to a remote learning environment, just as it is for anybody else. But we've never really been able to offer as much online education as we have you know, in-person classes. And so this pandemic's really highlighting the need for in-person classes and what that looks like. But it's also highlighting, I think, in some ways what the inequities are for access to online education. And so by asking these questions in the survey and bringing these up in our listening sessions that we're going to be hosting throughout the summer, I think we're really going to be able to uncover some things and uncover some stories. I'm really hopeful that people are able to participate. That being said, we have really no idea like if anyone's going to show up. All we can do is kind of put this out there, hope we get some results, hope that they're just, and you know, if we have to, slow down the process and go back and do it again. And hopefully we still have the resources and are able to do that. So I think that is most of what I had to say. I guess the last thing is that there really has been an uptick in racially motivated violence across this country. And that is not something that I think we've really addressed as a sustainability community. And I really appreciate, Mike, that you've had those listening sessions, and Aurora, those listening sessions where folks have been able to talk about like just their general experience of what the pandemic has been. There's, you know, maybe not quite enough of that going on. We've been so much like in a early response phase and how do we get the college shut down and bring it back up that we haven't been able to get to that. And I feel like hopefully this summer and this late spring we'll be able to address some more of those issues head on. But certainly our multicultural centers and our identity-based centers are doing that work, and we appreciate that very much.
Stefania, thanks so much for all of your thoughts, particularly what you just added there at the end, I think is so important, and the way that AASHE, as well as sustainability communities on campuses everywhere, can support multicultural centers and other efforts on campuses to really try and have these conversations, what you're talking about, Mike talked about, to really highlight racial equity and social justice and how we can bring that to the forefront. Stefania, I also really appreciate just hearing the way that you and the team have pivoted for your sustainability team, the efforts, appreciate sort of the challenge that the pausing of the climate action plan presents, but also the fact that equity is being pulled out as a priority is awesome. So thanks so much for sharing, Stefania. Keenut, would love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this. I have shared my screen. Can everyone see it? Yeah. I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm framing climate and COVID as being connected in conversation with senior leadership. I'm trying to make clear that this is an enterprise risk on par with cybersecurity or a pandemic. And so our adaptation and mitigation strategies need to be really seen in the context of resilience planning and enterprise risk planning. And so far that is going pretty well. And you'll see on my slide that I talk about silver linings, and I don't mean to belittle at all the deep tragedy, the loss, death, hunger, this devastating experience. But I do think it's important for us to name the ways in which this experience of the COVID-19 pandemic does at least flag some important changes that we'll need to address climate change. And the first of those is that science matters, and our public health officials have never had such a bully pulpit as now, and that is really important on climate. We see that we can act quickly to address a global crisis. I think Aurora already mentioned that, how interconnected we all are and how each individual's actions really matter. These are all going to be things that bolster our work on climate. And then I think we're just really all enjoying the decreased air pollution, and we've seen decreases in our greenhouse gas emissions, obviously not enough, but some decrease. And I think what's important there is the culture change that I hope will happen when we realize how much we all love having clean air and clear skies, that a generation of people will never want to not see the Himalayas again, will not want to not be able to take a deep breath in Bangkok, and that may lead to important long-term changes. But I'm also very concerned about some of the hits to sustainability that I think are happening now and will continue to happen. And I've listed some of these that are especially relevant to our campuses, and that is an increase in single-use items. I'm responsible for Emory and Emory Healthcare, which is the largest healthcare system in the state of Georgia. And so needless to say, there's a lot of waste. We are recycling our PPE more out of necessity than anything, but gloves, for example, are just such a problem. And I just think we're going to see more people inclined to want to use individual plastic water bottles and that sort of thing. And so that's going to be a challenge for all of us. I also think transit is taking a hit, and that's going to continue. We can probably anticipate seeing more single occupancy vehicles. I would like to think everyone will shift to biking, but I think we're just going to have to really think strategically together about how we address this issue of transit. I think we're going to see increased energy use because we're going to see increased ventilation and filtration. And that's important. I mean, we need more air exchange to have healthy buildings. There's no doubt about it. But what I would love to see is a move toward other alternatives, and I'll talk more about that. But just we're likely to see energy use from plug load as people bring in their own HEPA filtration systems into their offices. And then, of course, just in overall building ventilation, air exchanges going up. And then, of course, limited financial resources. All of our institutions are looking for cost savings. And so what I worry about are two things. First of all, that our sustainability programs could take a hit, but also just overall, if we've generally said, oh, an ROI of 10 years, that's acceptable, you know, is that going to get shortened? Is there going to be this focus just on short-term cost savings? So some of the things that we're working on at Emory, I'm focusing a lot in terms of built environment, on taking advantage of the moment to really press forward for healthy buildings and trying to think of some solutions like radiant heating and cooling. I was really impressed in my conversations with Shauna Weber at Princeton that they were able to get radiant heating and cooling for their child care center and their new University Health Services Center, based solely really on the argument that that would help with the spread of contagions. And so this is going to be really a great opportunity for us to convince our leadership that instead of forced air, let's take a hard look at radiant heating and cooling. Advanced filtration is something that certainly those of us who've been interested in well building certification have argued for, and here's our moment. Emory is in the middle right now of pursuing well certification on a building under construction currently, and I think that's gaining a lot of traction in this moment. I think it's a smart time for us to work on procurement and supply chain. I think we're going to see nationally a trend against just-in-time delivery. When I worked at Emory in the early 1980s for the first time, we had a materiel center, we had supply closets. You know, I came back to work at Emory in the 2000s and we had none of that anymore. We were just relying on just-in-time delivery. And I think we've learned the hard way that we need to have our supplies closer to us and some redundancy of supply. And another important aspect of this is so many of us, especially who work on food, sustainable food issues, have argued for local sourcing of food. And now this is our moment with the vulnerabilities in the food supply chain. It's become clear that local food is resilient food. And so I don't have time to talk about it today, but I encourage you to look up the Working Farms Fund program that Emory is partnering with the Conservation Fund, and we're entering into food purchase agreements. This is sort of a similar concept to power purchase agreements that we do for solar, or the water purchase agreement we did with our water hub. But it's a way to build out the next generation of farmers in Metro Atlanta. We're targeting African American, female, Native American, and other underrepresented farmers to have farmland that's under a conservation easement and can only be used for farming, but will allow a steady supply of local food to Metro Atlanta. And obviously that has gained a lot of traction now. Energy, we are this weekend having cranes come to campus to install 5.5 megawatts of solar. And I think we can make strong arguments for solar and microgrid installation. We are also working on a combined heat and power microgrid solar battery backup install right now. And the way I've been able to make an argument for those moving forward is that they're third-party financed, and Emory's eager to find ways to move money off the project budget. And that's an opportunity for millions of dollars to go, off the project budget, since philanthropy has slowed down. So that is an opportunity to take advantage of. And also in our curriculum, we in our School of Medicine have not been allowed to have our medical students have the same kind of clinical practice opportunities. And so we've had to create new coursework for them. And there's a new course, Climate Crisis in Clinical Medicine, which is all online on our website. And I encourage you to take a look at it. But that opportunity probably wouldn't have been there if we'd had just our normal business as usual. We also held our big climate conference last week virtually. We had Naomi Klein as our speaker. She was brilliant, and it was fantastic and very well attended virtually. And I love the idea of doing our climate conference virtually every year. For one thing, it's very fun to get to see Naomi Klein in her own living room, and she was wonderful. And we recorded it at no cost. You just record the Zoom, and I just think, just in terms of carbon savings, there's just some real benefits to that. So I'll close with that. Thanks.
Gina, thank you for all of your thoughts that you just shared. It's really great to hear how you're framing your work, and I really appreciate at the start of your slides how you talked about framing the climate crisis as an enterprise level risk, like cybersecurity. I really appreciate that framing. I'm sure many others do as well. And also, one of the other pieces that popped, in addition to your support for virtual events, which is reassuring to me since we're doing our first virtual conference this year, but also hearing about, in terms of supply chain and particularly food, and the local food systems is a resilient food system. And I really appreciate that also some similar conversations definitely happened throughout the various discussions. So thanks, Keenat, for sharing all of what's happening. Really appreciate it. And Raghu, it would be great to hear from you. And I realize I neglected to share, in addition to the fact that you're wearing a hat from the University of Missouri, one of the hats that you wear is AASHE board member. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. One of the challenges of going last is that everyone else has stolen your thunder. So a lot of what I wanted to bring up has already been put far more articulately than Mike and Kenneth, I hope I said the name right, and Aurora and Stefania. So I can reiterate some of the points that they've made. About me, I'm at the University of Missouri right now. I'm the sustainability manager, and I teach a class on sustainable development. I'm going to read a quote. I'm going to start by reading a quote by one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy, and she wrote an article recently in the Financial Times, and the quote goes like this: "Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it." So this really struck a chord with me, and I think this is a golden opportunity right now to revisit, particularly in a society like ours, which is a consumer society, as to what is the good life. Because within that question is how much we consume and the consequences of our consumption on other people, usually the vulnerable people of the planet. So this is a fantastic opportunity for us to revisit this question as to what is the good life. So with regards to my work over here, the university, like most schools, were teaching online. My office activities largely talking to faculty right now. So I've been talking to a lot of faculty about expanding their curriculum for to incorporate sustainability. This is also a good opportunity for our profession to broaden. Our profession does have a strong emphasis on the facilities, and that's very important, unquestionably very, very important. But it's also important to broaden our engagement into justice and socioeconomic issues. One of the things that the COVID crisis has done is display, or rather expose, the divides within our society. How is it that essential workers are considered essential, but they're not paid like essential workers? Why is that? So these are some of the aspects of our society that we need to take a close look at. So I've been talking to a lot of faculty about this. Some of the things that you all mentioned over here, which is localization. We need to revisit our supply chains, our purchasing practices, and justice issues again. Who is affected most widely, as Mike pointed out, is Black and brown people that are most widely affected by this. And they're not the ones that caused this crisis. A lot of the travel which has spread this crisis is done by the relatively well-to-do people. And just like with the sustainability crisis, the impacts are borne by vulnerable people who are not responsible for the crisis. So these justice issues is something that have been taken up with a lot of faculty over here. A lot of the other points that I wanted to bring up, you folks have reiterated, which is, as Aurora pointed out, the possible, rather the impossible now appears very possible. Just a few months ago, when we talked about the Green New Deal, the most common statement was, how much does it cost? How are we going to pay for it? Well, that shouldn't be a question anymore. The government is finding money to cope with this crisis. Unfortunately, a lot of it is, again, going back into the pockets of the wealthy. But if there's enough civic engagement, we can find money to transition our society to a green economy. So these are some of the topics that I've been talking to a lot of faculty about, revisiting consumer culture, localizing, building resiliency, revisiting our supply chains, and then social justice. I don't want to take too much time reiterating what a lot of you folks have said, but I'm happy to go to questions with this.
Thank you so much, Raghu. I really appreciate your thoughts. I really appreciate the quote that you shared from Arundhati Roy, and I also really appreciate your, the impossible feels possible now framing, and definitely recognize that that is a lot of what's going to be informing both AASHE staff as well as board discussions moving forward. And perhaps just a couple of other comments that before we move to questions here. Again, my gratitude to the speakers today for sharing your experiences, how you're continuing to make progress and making these connections between COVID-19 and sustainability. And I think as AASHE continues to lean into this ever-changing world, as I mentioned, we are going to have our first virtual conference this year, which we're very excited about. And I think one of the things we're really being mindful of, especially not just for the conference, but leading up to it, is how to create meaningful connection. And while we continue to provide, hopefully, the resources and professional development opportunities that many of you have come to rely on in our weekly webinars hosted by Daita, who's been helping us throughout today, but I also want to create what I feel is perhaps an opportunity to fill a gap in creating opportunities for more discussion. And I'm already thinking about sort of a discussion series phase 2, perhaps this summer, that could really help us as a community lean into particular topics and having some discussions to really try and elevate some of the pieces that many campuses are struggling with, as well as sort of areas for us to, exactly what Raghu was just saying, sort of help advance that conversation about making the impossible possible. So I welcome comments and feedback from those participating today, as well as our larger community, on what more AASHE can do to support the community. We're continuing to think about how we reinforce the value of sustainability in higher education, how we can help our community advocate for sustainability in higher ed on their campuses and the community. So again, I really appreciate everybody for being here. I know we have 10 minutes left, so not a heck of a lot of time for questions, but I guess one question that comes to mind from one of our attendees here is, and perhaps what we can do is maybe a quick go around. What is the best way we in our sustainability positions can integrate sustainability into our new world? So again, perhaps sort of building on this idea of value of sustainability positions, but who might want to start? Again, the best way we can integrate sustainability positions into our new world. Kina, you want to start? Your thoughts?
Sure. So I think, I talked about this a little bit, but I really do think this is in some ways our moment. I hate to say that, but it's true, just because we've been saying for so long that we have to take speedy action on climate. And if we make clear to everyone, well, you think pandemic is a hit to our economy and our society, just you wait, I think that we have an opportunity to elevate these issues of climate change, and that would be my lead. I mean, that is always my lead. And then with that comes, of course, opportunities to talk about economic inclusion and equity. But I think the reality is our leadership, they're scared to death. They're feeling a lot of stress. And I think they want solutions. And one of the great benefits of our community is we have been thinking and talking about these solutions for so long. We have them ready to go. And so I have found an actual increased openness among senior leaders to understand, for example, we already in Georgia are talking about return to campus because our whole state's been open since April 24th, So how do they do that safely and with a level of awareness of, the impacts in terms of climate change and waste and all these issues that I've talked about? And so I think we have a level of traction with that right now that we might not have otherwise. Now, one of the interesting things though about it is I find even in the sustainability community, there's an almost tension between the advanced filtration, increased ventilation rates, and all that stuff we're going to need to see to have healthy, safe workspaces, and this real sense that energy efficiency, you got to make those buildings so tight. I mean, I hate it that we have no operable windows in almost any building on our campus because we've made them so tight. So there's still some of that, I think, for us as a community to work through. But I think overall, we're really well versed and well armed to be the kind of go-to resource people on how do we do this, guys, Whereas in the past, we've been sort of marginalized and thought of as sort of the group that was crying, the sky is falling. It's fallen, so.
Tina, thanks so much. Unless anybody else has any burning questions, I want to hop to the next, burning comments rather on that question. I want to hop to the next question just because we are limited on time. Seeing nobody jumping in, I will ask, so many of you heard me say at the start, one of the key sort of themes from the discussion series was this fear of funding, losing funding, not only for positions, but also academic funding, research funding, et cetera. Perhaps, are there any recommendations you all would have, and it perhaps flows very nicely from the previous question around how to position sustainability positions within this new world, any recommendations on how we can best advocate or at least sustain funding for sustainability? Aurora, you want to start?
Well, I think it does flow from, you know, showing the relevance, and I think to build on the fact that, you know, people are afraid. I think showing up calmly and confidently is the first step, because we do have a lot to offer, and knowing that thank you, honey. Knowing that we are coming with value and looking for who are the decision makers who are going to be deciding about that resource allocation, and being very strategic in ensuring that those decision makers understand that value, and knowing that understanding where those decision makers, when they're making decisions, what are the values, what are the screens that they're applying, how are they making those decisions, and being sure that they understand the work that you're doing and how you are supporting in a very broad way multiple benefits to the campus. I think we should all feel good about the fact that sustainability is no longer, for the most part, considered a fringe topic. We're so used to it being this thing that nobody takes seriously, and it's really not that anymore. You know, people now realize that it is, you know, it's something that's important and core to society in a way that even 3 or 4 years ago wasn't the case. There may be some laggards still in your institution, but figure out who those key decision makers are. Make sure that we're very good at giving credit to other people. That's fine. Still keep doing that publicly. But in private, for those decision makers, be targeting them and be essentially selling your value to them very strategically. The second thing I'll say is look for strategic partnerships where you can bring in resources to the institution, even in small ways, because that's a very good way to show that you're adding value. Even small grants, small donors, in-kind resources that you're bringing in, and yet again, go to those decision makers, show them that you're bringing in those resources. And then the third thing I'll say is, again, targeting decision makers, figure out what their needs are, figure out where there are things that they want done, and then demonstrate to them that you can help get it done. But maybe you need a little bit more resources in order to help them get done what they want to get done, and they're going to be a lot more likely to give you those resources to help them achieve their goals. And those are some of the techniques that I've used, and I've had reasonably good success even in sort of times of relatively limited resources.
Thanks, Aurora. That's awesome. Really helpful. I would also point people to the Beyond Doing the Right Thing, the Value of Sustainability in Higher Education document that AASHE created a few years ago now. That's on our website. That's sort of a bit of a business case that might be helpful to folks that are worried about funding. We have 2 minutes left, and there's too many questions to get to. However, I'd love to do a closing round, because I think it's been helpful to hear from each of you what's working on your campuses, how you're trying to sort of frame this current challenge. And if we could close with something that is giving you each hope right now, I think that would be awesome. And Mike, I'd love to start with you. Again, thanks so much for sharing today. What is something that is giving you hope right now?
Well, very quickly, similar to what Aurora was talking about, we've been trying to do a lot of things before and trying to figure out how to align that with what senior leadership wants. And one of the biggest things we've been trying to do is get the university to endorse a climate emergency declaration and then implement a climate emergency action plan. So this has sort of put that on hold at the top level, but in the events that we've had for Earth Week, a lot of students, staff, faculty, and staff have reiterated that they want this declaration to pass. And there's like an outpouring of support from students that are actually doing the work, giving documents to senior leadership and really pushing for more sustainability to happen at the school. So a lot of the community within the new school is really pushing to see more sustainability even now in the face of what's going on. So that's something that's been heartening to us as a center and to the people that are working on sustainability at the new school.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Stefania, something that's given you hope.
So right now, I think there's so much opportunity for some of our staff, or a lot of our staff, including myself, to catch up on technology and using technology and being comfortable with technology and using it in the workplace. And there are so many implications from that, for whether it's using automated, scheduling in our classrooms, to being able to communicate remotely and not, drive between 4 different campuses constantly. And at the same time, there's also a little bit of danger there, but I really do think that overall people are learning new skills and getting a profound appreciation for where it's important to be face-to-face, and how to use that time well, and maybe where it doesn't need to happen. So
Awesome. Thanks, Stefania. Raghu, something that gives you hope.
Oh, well, I'm very hopeful. I'm very excited about this opportunity. Essentially, we talked about people being scared, and yes, for a lot of people, it is scary. But for me, the business as usual scenario is more scary. Business as usual means we're doomed. So this pandemic is now an opportunity for us to look at a new world, envision a new world. So I am very excited. This is an opportunity. Conversations that we couldn't have can be had now. So I think this is a golden opportunity, and we, for those of us working in this field, should grab it with both hands.
Thanks, Raghu. Keenat, something that gives you hope.
I was very encouraged to recently read a poll that showed that across party lines, Republicans, Democrats, public health officials were considered a trusted source of information. And overwhelmingly, and obviously that's not everyone, but I think that whole point of science being something we can't disregard, I think that is really starting to have a resonance that gives me a lot of hope.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Keenat. Aurora.
I no longer have any hope. I think that hope is something, you hope that the plane doesn't crash. Hope is something you have no control over. But I think this is a time for courage.
I appreciate that framing a lot. And I'm really grateful to you all. Thanks to everybody who's participated. Sorry, we went a couple minutes over, but stay tuned for more information on Phase 2 discussion series, and know that we at AASHE welcome your comments, your ideas, your recommendations for how we can best support the community. With that, thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Megan.
Thanks for having.
Thank you, Megan.